Hi, this is Guitarist Denis Taaffe, and I'm in my home studio here on this Monday evening. And I wanted to take a look back at the making of my 64th album of 2006. And it was my 79th album overall. And it's called Modern Rock Guitar, Volume 79, Extinction. And if you look at that cover, we've got these animals on the cover there. This was just a public domain photo, and it's a very long album, as it has 23 tracks, and it's about 70 minutes and 46 seconds long. And I guess what I should tell you is that back at that time, what I was really going for was to really make a rock album. So a lot of guitar, a lot of rock guitar and rock guitar riffs, and so on. So let's talk about the gear that I used. Now you have to remember, my style of playing and so on is everything is improvised on the spot, and I use bass emulation, which is done on guitar, and then it sounds like bass, but it's actually guitar, and then I loop that. Okay, and so these are all done, and then all kinds of live guitar, and then guitar loops done on the fly, where you record a piece of what you're playing, and then it starts to play back as well. So it's layers and layers of guitar loops and things. By this time, it was really kind of second nature to me. I didn't think about it all that much. And so every track was improvised. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't have any structure. I mean, you still, had musical rules and theory and so on to go by. But it made a lot of fun to see in what direction tracks would take you and so on. And so it was all performed live in the studio, which is really my home studio. Just a room where I record, basically, and have all my guitars set up. And back then I was using a rack system, and I was using a Line 6 pod pedal board. And at the time I had a secret weapon, and it was the Digitake S200 effects unit. And the reason I used that with the pod is it had a noise gate. Without that noise gate, the pod, especially with the kind of high gain guitar sounds I was using back then, it would feed back uncontrollably and you get horrible noise and things. But with that S200 in there, it also provided a little bit of delay and reverb. It made for a much more controllable sound. So basically I would play, and as I was playing I'd be listening and thinking, okay, now what would be a good part that would go along with that, and so on. And that's how these tracks developed. And it's great, because I was playing by myself. This type of playing worked. If I was playing with someone else, it'd be a lot more difficult to convey ideas and where I was taking the track. Besides, if you were playing by yourself, it's a lot simpler. So anyway, that's how I actually recorded the album. And so I want to take you through a few tracks here. And I'll talk about them and so on. Yeah, it's hard to believe, when I listen to them, that they were actually improvised on the spot and performed live in the studio. And I would never go back and add overdubs, guitar later and that kind of thing. I mean, these are live recordings, basically live in the studio recordings, if you like. And basically, they would either end when I got tired of it, or if I made a horrible mistake or something, then I would end the track. It just depends. And that's the thing, when you're doing this kind of looping live, man, one mistake and it's over, and especially when you're improvising, you want to try to do the most that you can and not be afraid, to make a mistake. And sometimes it would work great, and other times not so great, and I would make a mistake and end the track, a wrong note or in the wrong place, what have you. Okay, so there's a little background on what I was going for at the time, and you have to remember, by that time in 2006, with my 64th album of that year, so I had it down to a science, really. Just my setup was set up perfectly for capturing levels and so on. A lot of the drums and so on were drum samples rather than from drum machines. Sometimes they were mixed with drum machines. A drum sample is where an actual drummer, it's a recording of an actual drummer playing a small part, and then those parts are looped into a drum track on there. And it seemed to work quite well, really. Okay, so let's take a look back at Modern Rock Guitar Volume 79, Extinction. And by the way, I should also mention, it was newly reissued, but not only reissued, but remastered as well. They kind of cleaned it up, brought up the levels especially. Back then, wasn't able to really do that very well. So it's a lot better sounding album than really the original was. I'm really quite pleased with it now. Kind of fun to listen to. And the reason it's newly reissued is when it was originally issued, the company that did that kind of got away from the entire music thing and abandoned, most of my recordings. From one day to the next, they were just unavailable, sadly. Whereas now, with a different company, and it'll be available once it's released. It's available long term, for years and years and years. Available at CD Baby, Amazon, iTunes, Spotify, and so on, so on, so on. So if you want to look for it, definitely can. I know at CD Baby, I think it's like $5 for the whole album, a digital download. And I hadn't listened to this album in years, so it was really very interesting to go back and hear it, and also hear it in a, sounding better than when it was originally recorded, and especially a couple of tracks, and I'll go into that later, you'll see. Alright, so I'll man the controls here, and we'll go through these pretty quick because it's 23 tracks, so we don't want to get, too bogged down, right? Okay, Alright. So, the very first track is called Beowulf. And if you see the cover with the snow and the big hides and so on, you know, kind of makes sense. Okay, so let's take a little listen to Beowulf. So there's that emulated bass on guitar and the drum samples there. And then the guitar, I'm doing swells right there. And that's where you pick a note and then you bring up the volume after you pick it so you don't hear the picking sound and just hear the note kind of swell and it sounds like, kind of like a synthesizer. Let's fast forward a little bit because it's almost an 8-minute track. We'll go to the 5-minute mark. Okay, so that makes for an interesting intro track. You know, the guitar is kind of atmospheric in the background and so on. So now let's move to track 2, Winged Reptiles. Alright, and we'll take a little listen to that. Let's fast forward that. Now there I'm really building on that riff, you know, guitar riff. Remember, I was trying to create a real rock album. So there I'm introducing that riff. Okay, now we come to track 3 called Extinction, which is the name of the album, and it is also the main riff of the album, which gave me an idea to do a rock type album. And the problem is, on the original recording I could never get the guitar loud enough. Now, I like the riff very much, and the drums are really pounding and so on. But the guitar was always real low, and so you didn't get the actual power of the main riff, if you like. But on the newly remastered edition, they're much louder, and finally, it's the sound that I was thinking that I had, you know. And it's finally coming out in the recording. And so this is a very, very short track, and it just kind of introduces the main riff that I had in mind. So let's take a listen to that. Okay, so that's really the main riff of this album. And that riff will come back later. But that's just kind of an introduction to it. And you can hear that kind of guitar riff there. And I expand on it in later tracks. Alright, now track 4 is called Nomads. Let's hear a little of that. There I'm harmonizing the swelled guitars together. And there's the rhythm guitar playing another riff. Rock riff. Okay, so that was track 4. Now remember, I'm setting up this album, so I'm really introducing the riffs. Now, here's track 5. And without track 5, I don't think I would have really completed this album. Because this really is what the entire album's about. You know, really trying to make a rock album. And it's using that main riff once again. Alright, let's take a listen to that. Expanding on the track 3 riff, and when the main guitars come in, it's kind of doubled, one layered guitar and one live. Alright, the second guitar should be coming up. Here it is. Okay, and yeah, I really like that riff, and I think my choice of drum samples were very good. I think it was very much influenced by Nirvana's Bleach album. It's one of the albums that I had picked out of a bin at a local record store a long time ago, and didn't know who they were or anything, and I thought, that's kind of interesting. So I think that very much influenced that track and the idea of making a rock album. Okay, Now, let's go to the next track. It's the 6th track. It's called The Trackers. Back then, I was still using samples for kind of effect sounds and so on. And there's one here, you can hear it. You know, one sounds a little bit like a cricket, and one a synthesizer type sound. A very short track, just kind of divide things up a little bit. Okay, now let's move on to the 7th track called The Hunt. Here's another main riff for the rock guitar. And I doubled the guitar, one layered and one live. And you'll hear when I'm making the bend, it sounds a lot larger. Right there, that bend. Kind of a Led Zeppelin-ish type thing. It's kind of a cross between the Led Zeppelin and the Beatles. You know, very standard, you know, E to A and then back down to E and so on. Okay, let's go to track 8 called In the Valley. Okay, and you'll notice this is similar to track 1. Expanded ideas a little bit. So really I was creating themes there, right? Different themes for the album with the overall theme, where they come together to make one overall theme. Listen to it now, I'm quite impressed because the drums really fit the tracks pretty well, I think. Alright, let's go to track 9, Camouflage. Guitars. That's kind of a dark track. Alright, number 10, The Saxons. Let's hear that one. And here expanding on the main riff from track 5. focusing on the main riff, more playing over the main riff, if you like. So I'm adding a lot of swelled guitars, atmospheric guitars, and so on. Alright, we'll fast forward a bit. It's a 4-minute track, so we'll go to the 2-minute 16 mark. Another attempt to try to capture the power of that riff, and for some reason it was very difficult to do. Just the guitars just wouldn't translate very well as far as the loudness of it. So I think I made several attempts, as I remember, but I also really set the theme for the album, you know. I'm going over all the tracks and so on. Okay, let's move on. I believe we are at number 11, Foot Soldiers. Let's hear that. Okay. That's expanding on the introductory track. But now we're taking it much further for the actual guitars and atmospheric guitars and so on. Concentrating on the groove of the track, if you like. Okay, moving on to track 12. It's a pretty short track called Leviathan. Let's take a little listen to that. Like how the music worked well with the drums, you know, as the drums were playing. Okay, let's move on to number 13, Finding the Herd. There's the main riff, and we're expanding on that. notice the drum fills there, and that the main riff is really kind of in the background. In other tracks, it was the main riff, whereas here it's kind of in the background, and I'm putting swells over it, kind of create an atmosphere there. Okay, let's move on. Number 14, The Shaman's Vision. Okay, so basically what this is a short track, and there's no guitar on it whatsoever. They're just a collection of audio samples that I put together. And really what this signifies is it's a break in the CD. In reality, if this was an album, it'd be definitely a double album. Or, even released on CD, it'd be 2 CDs. And so, after the 14th track, that's side 1, if you like. And then, beyond that, 15 to 23 is side 2. So was the transition idea. I mean, when I listen back to it, it's a little hokey, though. We'll hear it a little more. Yeah, the voice saying all systems go. It's really, gosh, it even sounds dated now, but that's all right. Okay, let's move on to number 15. And number 15 is called The Trading Post. So let's take a listen to that. This theme before, and I'm expanding on it here. And it's about 5-minute track, so let's forward to about 3 minutes 16 seconds. And that's kind of harmonics and feedback and so on. Harmonics going over the main theme there. By this time, this is basically side 2 of the album. Instead of really new themes, a lot of it's revisiting old themes and expanding on them. Okay, let's move on. Number 16, Trinkets. Let's take a listen to that real quick. Here we go. Again, expanding on an existing theme that we had previously. Got the swells over the main theme. Let's fast forward a little bit. It's about 3 minutes 30 seconds. So let's go to 2 minutes. So there you can hear guitar solos. just expanding on that theme that was in a previous track, adding solos, guitar solos, extra guitar parts, and layering of swelled parts and that kind of thing. Okay, let's move on. Number 17, Extinction. Okay, and notice that's also the name of the album. So this is obviously, I'm going to expand on the main theme, I'm assuming. Let's try that. Yeah. So there you got a guitar solo coming over it. Guitar parts there. There's the Jimi Hendrix 9 chord. Okay, let's move on here. Number 18 is called Jamestown, and obviously that's a reference to Jamestown, in Guyana, right, where the religious guy asked his followers to drink Kool-Aid, and a whole bunch of them committed suicide and so on. Anyway, number 18, let's take a listen to that one. I have to move here. Okay, so this is an earlier theme with a guitar solo. Now, you have to remember the reason why there's all these previous themes and then expanded guitar parts on there. A lot of it had to do with the fact that I was trying to stretch it out and take it as far as I could, improvisation-wise, and to keep coming up with different guitar parts. A lot of them were kind of rhythmic guitar parts, kind of like using the Jimi Hendrix 9 chord and that kind of thing. Creating a rock rhythm and so on. Okay, let's move on. Track 19. It's called Full Moon. Okay, so let's hear that one. There we go. So obviously a long guitar solo. Using arpeggios. I think it's around this time that I really started using arpeggios and concentrating on guitar melodies rather than just flailing solos with a bunch of notes in it. So that's what I was trying to do there, I believe. Okay, let's move on. Okay, now here's a real short track. And I believe it's number 20, Furs. as in, trading furs back in the, years ago when people discovered the United States and so on. Okay, so here we go. Same kind of thing, another guitar solo. Notice the speeding up of the solo with a lot of sweep picking and things that I used to do back then. Really, back then I remember that a lot of the tracks that I did, there were some for the average listener, and there were some tracks that would only really interest guitarists, other guitarists. And this is one of them, just basically a big guitar solo. Alright, let's move on to 21. 21 is called Exploitation. Okay. So let's hear that one. Okay, same thing, expanding on an earlier theme. Putting clean guitar over the distorted guitar. And there you notice it's two different rhythms. The main riff's a little faster than the clean guitar, which is a little slower. But still played in time. Okay, and that improvisation goes on for quite a while, really, and a lot of that has to do is to see what direction I could take it in, besides just the main riff and putting a guitar solo over it. I really try to see what else I could add to it or change it and make it go in a certain musical direction, and that's what I was doing there. Okay. Let's move on to track 22. The Primitives. Okay. Let's check out the Primitives. It's a 4-minute track, so let's fast forward a little bit to 2:47. when improvising there, came up with a clean guitar part that works well with the bass line. The drums there are pretty strange, really. This would happen often, you know. I would just use different patterns and mix them together, you know. Probably nothing a regular drummer would play. But for me, I really liked it. And I like the improvisation idea of it. And it really does create, for me, a mood and atmosphere, which was the whole point of the thing. Okay, let's close out the album. Finally, track 23. And this is the ending theme of the album. So this is the last track right here. And it's called Fossils. Because that's really all we find nowadays of ancient animals and so on. Okay, so let's hear that. And it's 2 minutes and 53 seconds long. You have to remember, at that time, Joe Satriani type playing of guitar rock melodies, instead of just flailing rock solo guitar. So here, that's basically what I was trying to do, though it was improvised. So, you don't have a chance to work it out ahead of time. And you've got to try to make a melody work. Alright, let's hear a little bit more of that. That's a good rhythm part, improvised over this. Some of the guitar loops coming in, kind of swelled notes. Well, I kept playing the rhythm part live. So there's my attempt at a melody, solo-wise, guitar solo. Joe Satriani, if you like. Okay. And that's it. That's the end of the album. Man, that is a really long album. It really is a double album, if you like. Somehow I got it all on one CD at the time. Track 14 was the transition from side 1 to side 2. And side 2 was pretty much, other than really one track that was really a new theme, all the others were existing themes expanded on, to see if I could take it in another direction and so on. Overall, what I can say about this album is I'm really pleased with it, especially the remastered version, because some of the rock riffs, are good rock riffs. A lot of times, especially when using loops and so on, it's almost like rock tracks were too nice in a way. That they didn't quite rock. In the sense of a rocking track. So that's really what I tried to do with this album, and I'm very pleased with some of the guitar riffs there, and I'm also pleased that in listening back to it, that I didn't stray from the 3 or 4 main themes of the album. I did improvise and try to take it in certain directions, but not so far off, that it was unrecognizable on there. So there you go. That's the making of Volume 79, and it was really my attempt to create a rock album. And when I listen back to it, I think it certainly does sound like a rock album as compared to some of the earlier albums up to that point. So from that moment on, I moved on to Volume 80, which we'll visit some other time. Alright, thanks for sticking around and taking a listen. See you next time. Bye.